and welcome to the Men's Journal Everyday Warrior podcast. I'm excited for this one. We've got Nikolaj Coster-Waldau. Unfortunately, to stereotype you, everyone knows you as Jaime Lannister. Except I got to tell you this story. So my wife is probably one of 100 people in the United States that didn't watch Game of Thrones.
Well,
maybe
then you can
1,000
add my
people.
wife to it. So there's two of them.
But she did know you. And I said the name. She's like, the name is so familiar. So I pulled up the other woman, and she sort of had this frown. She's like, "Oh, that guy," because you played it so well. She's like, "Men." So funny story. But Nikolaj, thanks for joining us. Want to get into your background because people rarely understand the environments and the backstories that shape the people we watch on TV or sports or significant business leaders, politicians. Let's dive into your life. I mean, I read that you were born into a village of 40 people.
Yeah, in a good year. Yeah, it was kind of there was a it was tiny. It's in Denmark, a tiny farming community. One of those villages that is kind of built around a big farm. So the houses that were there were kind of for the farm workers. And We moved there when I was 5. My parents divorced, so I was there with my mom, my two older sisters. So yeah, we grew up there. I always think of my childhood as good. I was, had great friends, but it was, it's funny that thing. I'm sure you can relate to that. You get older, you always think that, well, my childhood was just my childhood, but then compared to others, you realize it was as always, it's unique and special. But I had a lot of time on my own. There was no supervision. There was no there were no adults interfering, if you will. My mom had trust in us as kids. She had to go to work. Um, um, and and my dad was, as I said, they divorced, and then later they remarried, which was not a necessarily a smart choice. My dad worked in Greenland at that time. There's an American Air Force base at the very top of Greenland, Thule, and he worked there. And he would come back every 3 months for a month, and then it would be the first week would be great. He would still have money in his pocket, and then the next 3 weeks would be less great, and then he would take off. So it was kind of that was the routine. And then they remarried, and then they divorced again because obviously there was a reason they divorced the first time.
It seems from doing the research, you've been surrounded by women all your life. You've got 2 sisters. You now have your wife, 2 daughters. How's that impacted you?
Well, I mean, I think I've been very lucky. I mean, it's a yeah. I guess at one point when I was younger, there was definitely a search for a father figure that I was, obviously wanted to get from my dad. I didn't get that, so I got that from various coaches. Looking for someone, teachers. But I think it's, it's a good thing to have a lot of, the female perspective in your life. And it also, I guess, for a lot of guys, when you grow up, if you don't have that, it can kind of be. Women are very intimidating if you're not used to it. Do you know what I mean? Like that I did never had that kind of fear of women because they are different. They are. It's a whole different thing, and I was exposed to all that um, early on in a big way. So I try to think of it as a positive. But I don't know. Maybe you have to ask my wife about that. She's probably gonna say, "What are you talking about? You
Would
don't
you say you
understand." Yeah, yeah,
understand women?
exactly. She's like, "What are you?"
Yeah.
But I've always had very strong male friendships, and I think that um, I obviously have female friends as well, but my male friendships are really the ones that are the deepest, and I think maybe there's a reason for that. That I needed that.
You've talked, and I always hate to dive into tough issues, but publicly you've talked about your father and his alcoholism. And when I think of, because we are all shaped by our environments, I don't think anyone will doubt that. Nature versus nurture. Nurture has definitely something to do with our raising and how we become. But shot caller is a perfect example of this. You were a traditional family man thrust into an environment, and in order to survive that environment, you had to adapt to that environment. Um, what did you learn from your father's alcoholism? I mean, one when you were a child. I mean, that had to be a different perspective. And how's that shaped you as a man?
My dad was like alcoholism is just it's a horrible thing because it's like a disease and it just infects everything and it has consequences not just for yourself but also of course for your family and your surroundings. He wa- so I guess the very basic answer is like I always for me when I hear that this guy became an I mean, I guess there are two ways you can look at it. You can go, well, it runs in the family. So the classic is, well, his dad was an alcoholic, so he became an alcoholic, so his kids are going to be alcoholics. And I was kind of the opposite. I was like, well, I'm never gonna be like that. That I don't want, because it was so it was something that was controlling him in such a negative way, and it ruined his life. I mean, he had that was always something that I never understood that I can understand it like intellectually, I can look at it, but emotionally, I never understood how can you have like you have three kids and this is it's more important for you to have a drink like that I just couldn't emotionally understand that. And then of course I can understand intellectually as a grown up. I can see okay, fair enough. It's a disease. It just eats you up. It's an addiction. It's bigger than you, unfortunately. But I guess in some ways it shaped me in not wanting to do that, and it's also sometimes I guess that's in a positive way. Negative can also be that I've sometimes been afraid of losing control, if you will. So everything has been very focused always, and there's a strength and a positive in that, but it can also be negative because sometimes it's important to be able to just to be in the moment and let not always want to know what happens around the next corner, but allow it to happen. So I've worked with that, but no, but and then the funny thing, the thing about and that's something I thought about as a grown up is that kids, you love your parents. It's almost unconditional. I mean, they have. I mean, even when they really mess up, there is still love there, and that's I remember when my father passed. This is more than 20 years ago. He was he was 58, and it was so painful because I never got to know the guy, and that was what you always want. Like in a way, as a kid, you always that's what you're looking. That's what you're kind of your whole childhood is just going, leading you towards the point where you can finally go, all right, I am a man now. Hello, who are you? Like where you get to know your parents as a grown up, and that's yeah. They shouldn't have remarried. It was kind of a out of necessity, I think. My mom was alone with three kids, and he was away all the time. So anyway, but yeah, I think that sometimes it's um I do believe like I've been married for 24 years and I'm very happy with my wife. And of course, as I don't know if you've been married, but like it, any relationship has its ups and downs, and I do feel for us, it's no, but I do feel like once we've gone through those tough patches, we kind of come out on the other side stronger. That doesn't always, that is not necessarily the case for everyone. And I know for my parents, it was definitely not the case. And then when they finally tore off the band-aid, it was for the best.
I've got to assume Game of Thrones took you away from your family for a long time. How did you deal with that with the family? I mean, what did you explain to the girls when you're going to be gone for? What I'm assuming month.
Well, actually, it wasn't. Game of Thrones was not bad. A lot of the other shows I've done in movies are much worse. I mean, Game of Thrones until the last two seasons, the most I worked a season would be 25 days, 30 days. So this was like the perfect job in terms of family, and it was shooting in Europe, so I could fly. It was a couple of hour flight. It was easy. It was nothing there, and they also would join me sometimes. So that was an easy one. I think the hardest. in my whole career has been the last few years with COVID because when I've been working, I was in Mexico last year. Before that, I was in Iceland, and that suddenly becomes 5, 6 months away because you can't break COVID protocol. That's been tough, right? But what about you? I mean, are you married?
So, unfortunately, and you know this community that I
Oh,
come from well, there was a high divorce rate. We had like a 95% divorce rate because we were gone so often, and we're not. I don't say that with
yeah.
any pride whatsoever. That is a horrible thing, and families were. I don't want to say families were destroyed, but families were broken because of it. I mean, that was just the speed of war for 20 years took
What was the longest? What's the longest you've been away
8 months.
at a time?
8 months.
Oh wow.
I'll tell you this. My son was born in 2008. 1 month later, I had to deploy to Iraq for a 7 month deployment. And when I got home, I tried to surprise the family, so I came around to the back sliding door, and my daughter was she was 4 by this point, but then this young toddler starts crawling around the side of the couch. Man, I broke out in tears. It was
Of course.
realization that like I don't want to say I was failing as a father, but it was a realization that I'm not fulfilling the traditional fatherly roles if I'm gone that long. So it was a balance for us, man.
Yeah. And are you still together, or did it break up?
No.
No.
Who's interviewing who here? No, I'm joking. I'm kidding with you.
Well, it's a
I know, I know.
conversation.
No, two amazing kids out of that marriage, who I'm extremely proud of. I am remarried, and I'll tell you that very strong-willed woman. I'll tell you,
Mhm.
regardless of my background, she runs that home, and it's a partnership. But I've learned a lot.
Yeah.
I've taken some time to reflect on my first marriage to make sure that um, one, I knew I was sure when I married her, but we will eventually probably have kids.
Sure.
But making sure that
But how did so one thing I always wondered when I because I've been when I've spoken to um, um, soldiers and people who deployed like you, and when you do what you did when you were active, the fact that it's very difficult to because when I go away, if I want to talk about with my wife about whatever happened at work, I'll talk to her about it, and it's easy to share, and that's you couldn't do that, or that's a different kind of thing. And how do you deal with that? Because obviously that must be. I just always found that must be the one thing that's tricky in a relationship where you want to be as close as you possibly can emotionally, but at the same time, there's something that is just very, very difficult
it,
to share.
I didn't want to expose them to that. Um, I've always told my kids, they had some sort of idea of what I did, but I'd always say that like I was a supply officer, that I got the resources for the guys that go outside the wire, even though that wasn't true. But
Hmm.
there was a high degree of compartmentalization. That is
Sure,
my problem to deal with the horrors we saw, the guys we left behind, the things we had to do. Because and again, Nikolaj, you saw this studying for the role to play Gary Gordon, but in order to
sure.
send evil people away, sometimes you have to go to hell yourself. There's nothing beautiful about war whatsoever, and we follow the rules.
No, and it's funny. It's an interesting thing because I remember I was talking to another of your colleagues, and then he was just saying, "God, I wish more politicians had seen what we've seen, because then they would work much harder to avoid war, because that it should always be the last resort. That should always nobody wants that."
When diplomacy fails, it is a failure of humanity. I'll put it to you that way. I'll say this: my father served in the army. He didn't go to Vietnam, but it was during the Vietnam era, and it destroyed him because I came home wounded on my second deployment pretty badly, and I'd lost a very good friend. Literally jumped on a grenade 3 feet from me. He was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor, but he saved my life, and it destroyed him because that was my second deployment. I went on 9 more deployments after that, and it destroyed them. I will be eternally grateful if my son chooses a different path and never goes into the military. I'll be inwardly proud of him, but I don't wanna feel what a father and a mother felt, for 7 months while their child, whether that child's 23-year-old or 30-year-old, I don't wanna ever feel that. Um, yeah, it's interesting, man. But so, I mean, your first major role in the US was Black Hawk Down.
Yes. No, it was an amazing experience. Also, because I learned so much. I remember I I just did a I did a tape at home with a buddy, and we sent it off, and Ridley Scott liked it, and then suddenly I get this call that I'm on my way to Fort Bragg in and boot camp, and it was the most fun. It was so cool. With just the three of us. There was me, Eric Bana, William Fickner, um, and then there were 12 instructors. And the first day they were like, okay, we discussed what to do with you Hollywood guys. And we thought, we were either gonna just, beat you up for a week, or we were going to have fun. So we decided to have fun, and we had so much fun. And what was interesting was that we both these two groups, there's these three actors and this group of instructors, soldiers from the special forces. We all had these preconceived opinions about the others. They were like, oh, we're going to have these soft, you know, you know, you know, you know, actors from Hollywood, and they don't know anything about real life, and we were like, oh, we're gonna meet this bunch of Rambos that all these preconceived opinions. And of course, what we found out was that it was the opposite. First of all, that you don't get to work for the special forces without having you being really smart and really thoughtful, and you're there for the right reasons, and you've worked really hard, and you're very talented, and then and there's no room for someone who's like, if now when I say Rambo, you know what I
Yeah.
mean, like that kind of that kind of mentality. There's just no, you have to be able you have to be smart. um and they saw us as we just connected. It was a really nice thing, and there were some amazing people there. And it just taught me something about, and it keeps, I think, in my life. I'm constantly reminded of that also when I've been traveling, and whenever I go anywhere. Don't ever jump to conclusions, and don't ever assume people, or any whatever it is. Like at the core, I would say 99.9% of people I meet are really decent,
Yeah.
good people, and always interesting. You know what I mean? There are always going to be someone where you go, oh, what a dick, but that doesn't. It's really the outliers. Um, and of course, in any job function where you meet someone who's at the top of their game, usually they're really interesting because they've had to. There's a reason they are where they are.
Dude, you've just said so many things that I want to dissect. I said it earlier. Hollywood is the greatest recruiting tool for any military. I mean, it's always been the propaganda machine, and I'm not saying that in a bad way. What sets you guys apart, why I loved Black Hawk Down, in particular, the characters you guys played, Delta Force. I mean, in the movie, the Rangers, had that youthful, uh, ignorance, and the Rangers are like that. But the 75th Ranger Regiment is awesome. But you guys nailed this role so well. When again, while Hollywood may be a great recruiting tool, it does not always cast our profession in a great light. Again, the Rambos. When I talk about the most lethal warriors I knew at SEAL Team 6 in Delta, is they were some of the kindest, most respectful, empathetic human beings that would never tell you how many kills they got, how many medals they have, or how many deployments they had. And you guys really portrayed these mature, well, let's call it operators, that anyone would be like, yeah, we're proud that they represent any nation that they represent. But what I mean, did you get to talk? to anyone that knew?
But it was just, no, when we were at Fort Bragg, we also had, obviously we had Lee Van Arsdale, who was like, he was our main instructor. He was also the colonel. He was he was there at the time. He was leading them. But we also met, we had coffee and dinner with some of the guys who, who were no longer with Delta, but we were still living around Fort Bragg. And it was just the nicest guys. And they would never, as you say, they would never say anything. But then one of them had, he was kind of the guy who Eric Bana's character was kind of modeled on. And he was like, what he did, that, those 18 hours was just so heroic and so insane. He just saved so many people. And he said something which I thought was interesting. He said, well, the only thing I remember was that I didn't hear a sound. Like, he was in the craziest gun battle, and it was like complete silence. There was just something about the way he described it, because his focus was so intense that he wasn't, that whole thing, that ability to not let everything, the madness, affect you, but still stay focused. I thought, I mean, the way he described it was just really interesting. And again, as you said, the nicest, calmest guy. I would never, and that was the only guys I met, I would never, if I didn't know, have picked them out as some of the, as you said, the most lethal soldiers in the world, or the most accomplished. I would never in a million years, because that's not, as you said, that's not usually how Hollywood portrays those guys. Usually they're like, "Ooh, come
Yeah,
on, kill,
yeah.
go," all that stuff.
It,
But
it,
it's funny you said that thing about recruitment tool. I was just reading about, like, it was just that the new Top Gun that came out back in the day when the first Top Gun came out. The Air Force had the biggest, spike ever, and I bet you it's happening right now.
yeah, yeah. With
Again,
the
anyway.
aviation community is definitely getting into this one.
Yes.
Let me ask this, man: were they shocked when they found out you were Danish?
Yeah. I mean, I didn't tell anyone. I mean, I didn't. Yeah, I don't. Unless they asked, I didn't mention it, because I thought, why ruin the why ruin the illusion? I had one kind of interesting. At Fort Bragg, there's the Special Forces Museum, and I went there on my own, and there's a wall of yellow stars at the end of the museum when you come through the whole thing. And at that time, the last two uh, golden stars were Randy Shukart and Gary Gordon. And then this guy came up to me and he was like, then next to me, he was like, "Oh, so you're one of them Hollywood guys?" And I said, "Yeah, yeah, I'm an actor." "Huh? Who you play?" I say, "Well, I'm portraying Gary Gordon." "You don't look like Gary." No, I don't. I know. I don't. Those are big shoes to fill. Yeah, well, sir, I will do my very best. I will, And it was clearly someone who knew him, but it was very moving to me, because suddenly it just hit home. That thing where this is like before we went out to Morocco where we shot, but up until then it had been so much. I had so much fun
Mhm.
training for this, and it was another part, and I was like, there was something about it which, I was so excited, Ridley Scott and all these things. But when I spoke to this guy, it was suddenly they were standing in front of that wall. It became so, it was just a very sombering moment where I went like, okay, I have to I have to do my very best. And also when we came out and I spoke to Ridley, and I told him the same thing. I said, "Listen, I mean, I know there's so many stories in this. This is really a story about this war battle more than it is about the characters. But I said, if there's anything, we can do, I want to, show our respect to these men who gave their lives." And he then, if you remember, the very last shot in the movie is this beautiful shot of the cargo plane, and you see the caskets, and then you hear, uh, it's actually Gary's words, the letter that was in his that left behind, that you guys I guess you all have to write a letter in case something bad happens. So that it meant a lot to me, and I was very proud that he put that in there because, yeah, it is a movie, it is entertainment, but this specific movie was also it was a real event, and people lost their lives, and
Nikolaj, let me put it to you this way, man. From all of us in the U.S. military, thank you for what you guys did, because you memorialized those men and you kept their legacies alive, and their legacies will live on because of that movie. I just went with a buddy to Iceland where we skydived into several
oh,
locations trying
oh wow,
to uphold the legacy. It's called legacy expeditions to keep the legacy of our fallen alive, and it's tougher than you think.
oh
And you got to see firsthand the type of men
yeah,
that these people were, men and women, both men and women. Let me say that in the military that
yeah,
are so
of course,
selfless for something they believe in. So you guys you guys absolutely crushed it, and that movie will forever be always a go to for a lot of military members. But naturally, everyone listening to this wants to go to Game of Thrones, dude. Walk me walk me into how that even came to fruition. I mean, were you approached? Did you hear they were producing something? How did you land that role first off?
no, I was it was I was in Los Angeles. I was testing for this movie that I was really excited about, called John Carter of Mars. Um, that I thought, I was I was gonna nail this thing, and I was gonna get it, and it was gonna be the biggest movie of all time. That's what I thought. I didn't get the part, but on the same trip, I met with my agent. Said there's this HBO pilot, which pilot is the first episode of a show, a test. They do a test before they decide whether they want to finance it. So, and I said, okay, but my focus was all about this thing, but it was HBO. So I thought, what's it about? And he said something about it's based on this series of books called The Song of Ice and Fire. It's like a fantasy. And I was like, I'm not sure. I mean, fantasy, is that really? But I met with the guys, and I was like, they were really cool. That thing when you meet someone where you go, oh, I wanna play with these guys. Like Dan Weiss, David Benioff were just smart and fun, and I was like, wow, this is. Then I read the pilot, and I thought, okay, this character is
Fascinating.
he's this beginning of a story arc is so interesting because it's so dark, and he's it doesn't get worse than that. He's sleeping with his sister. He's trying to kill his this kid, and this is weird. And then they told me what was going to happen for the first three seasons, and then yeah, then I was offered the part, and we shot the pilot, and I think when we shot it, we all thought this was just going to be a pilot because it was so weird and so many stories, so complicated to follow. So everything about Game of Thrones was kind of an what no one saw it coming that it was going to be such a massive thing, and I wasn't actively looking for it. It just kind of suddenly appeared. I have to. I know I have to try and make my answers shorter. I have a
No,
tendency
no,
to
no,
talk too
man.
much, but
This is great.
there you go.
Well, let me ask you this. I, I know one, you were up for the Emmy Award nomination for Outstanding Supporting Actor, but uh, certain film I don't critics said you played one of the best anti-heroes in film history, and in a lot of ways, Jaime Lannister became the main character that people followed. I mean, he was so complex. Um, what did you learn
Yeah,
from that role? Because I know the amputation of his hand sort of transformed that character as well. How did you deal with
yeah,
that?
yeah, absolutely. No, I just thought it's funny. It goes back to you try to understand where does this guy come from, and you talk about a complicated relationship with his dad. He didn't have a mother, and it all began there. Of course, then the sister relation, that whole family relationship, how messed up that was. And then at the core, the way I see him, uh, a very he's a soldier, and he's a very honorable the way I saw
Yeah.
him and the way I always, and that didn't waver. I didn't change over the course of the story. I know he had a big arc in terms of the circumstances of his life changed, but the very core of him was always, I will do anything to protect the people I love and what I believe in, and he did that, and that made me, and that meant, even doing horrible things like, who wants how can you cannot, and I don't think he would ever, I talk about him as if he's a real person. Of course he's not, but I don't think Jamie Lannister would ever try to excuse pushing a kid out the window, but he would probably do it again if he had to, and I could understand it, and I think that was interesting,
That
you
brings
know.
up a good question. As a father, man, would you? And I know my answer, man. I'm not trying to walk you.
No, but
I, there are things I would do to protect
no,
my
no, no,
children.
but the fact is this: at the end of the day, I think as you said, once you have kids, you will do anything. I mean, like it's if you had to choose between saving your kids or someone that you've never met before, you're gonna pick your own kids. You might have to kill yourself if you couldn't live with what you did,
Yeah.
but you would still pick your kids. That's just, I mean, the way I see it. I don't see how there could be any other choice.
You know, we've talked about earlier. You hate when people make, you know, assumptions based off of, gossip and other things. But uh,
Sure.
let me frame it this way: you've got to be wildly proud of playing Jamie Lannister on one of the greatest series in film history. But does it get to a point where you have to redefine yourself? I mean, has a stereotype been placed on you because of that?
No, I don't. I no, I don't. I mean, listen, it's always going to be there because, as you say, it was it was the biggest show in the world. So obviously, most people will know me from that show. Um, but that's okay. I mean, the funny thing is, the first thing I ever did as an actor back in Denmark was a movie that became very, very successful. So for years, I was known as that guy. It's just the way it is. I mean, there's if you start, yeah, that it's just the way it is. And the thing is, I am, I'm, there's been, this is also, um, a lot of people have then seen other shows I've done because of Game of Thrones. We're gonna check that out. Let's check out Shotcaller. That's the guy, Jaime Lannister. Let's just see what that is. And I've had so much great feedback from that, or when any of the other movies I've done. So I don't, it's not a. I'm not, as you. I mean, I haven't done 10 other nights because I don't think I should.
Yeah.
I'm looking for, and I'm not looking for that. But no, it's fine. I don't mind that. Yes, people will sometimes go, "Hey, Jamie Lannister or Kingslayer." That's absolutely fine. It's as long as they don't throw tomatoes or, you know,
Well,
it's a good problem.
it's a great problem to have. I got to tell you this: when on deployment, we looked forward to those releases. It was almost painful that they only released one a week when they came out. Man, we were
I know.
addicted to that series. But you brought up a role which I'm going to say is my personal favorite because it's just so. I mean, the initial part of the role of shot caller is maybe more similar to who you are as an individual, a father, a family man, and then this guy
Uh,
transforms in a let's just like I would rather go back to war
yeah.
10 times than end up in a penitentiary.
Oh my God. There's talk about, I learned I learned a lot from that movie. It was really, because I again I'd seen movies, I'd heard stories about the prison system, especially in the US. But when I did the research and found out, and Rick Wall, who's a great director who really goes deep in his research, he took me on these trips, and I met these guys, and it's scary uh, how real the story of Of course, it's a movie, and it's it get but everything that happened, I met guys who'd been through that whole journey, uh, and it's just it was heartbreaking, and it's also it's just a very scary thing because you go, how could that possibly happen in this day and age? How can how you don't just throw young men into these shark tanks, but we do, and uh, it's funny. I've met I've met a lot of people who love especially here. People come and say, "Yeah, I'm never gonna have a drink when I drive again." This is like big, it's a scary thing because that's what happened for the guy. He has a drink too many, he gets behind the wheel of a car, and a horrible accident happens, and he has to go away. And then and the reality of going to prison is it's not a fun place. It shouldn't be a fun place, but there are things in the system that is so. I mean, I didn't even know. I didn't know, like, like all the gangs. I had no idea that the gang system was created inside and is still run from the inside of prisons. It just seems so. It's crazy. But anyway, yeah, it was a very interesting shoot, with a great director. By the way, talk about Rick Wall, the director. He did a just I don't know if you've seen it. He did a documentary about a veteran, which is absolutely it's so good. And I just want to find the name because I want to if anyone's because you just said you did work for to remember you know veterans and this movie is just one of the most. It's so moving, and it's so powerful. And I want to just throw it out there so people can check it out.
So for Shotcaller, you had to put on 20 pounds. And I remember there was a Men's Journal article about that
Yeah.
was it was interesting, and you fed yourself to the point where uh, maybe you didn't know if this was all that healthy or not.
No, I had to put on a lot of muscle, and I was just working out like a beast. But then, of course, you have to eat so much. And I yeah, and yeah, I was there was a lot of animals killed so I could grow big.
Did you work the weight off afterwards?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, it's funny. I found that obviously when you get older, it takes a little longer. I've putting on muscle. I mean, I love the way that I'm joking with friends that sometimes if you go and you work out and they were like they don't want to do certain, they go, no, I don't want to get too big, and you go, listen, you're not going to get too big. It takes so long for you to get big. Um, but yeah, I could get rid of it fairly easy, but putting on the muscle is it takes a lot of time. Did I lose you again,
No,
Mike?
no, no, I'm
You
here.
froze.
So
Uh,
Nikolaj, we end this on sort of a note of vulnerability. I'm big about vulnerability. I think it's one of the most masculine human traits you can ever have. So we ask a series of questions. And we don't like to play stump the
okay.
chump, but take as much time as you need. What is the probably the hardest decision you've ever had to make in your life?
It's an interesting thing. It's like the hardest decisions are for me usually just hard before you before you finally take them when they do them, and then when you've done it, it's like, oh yeah, well that's done now. I think I've had very I find it difficult to if I have to let people go, and I think most people have that, but when you have to kind of move on from someone, and that it, and I'm not talking about a romantic
Yeah,
relationship, but it could be a work
business.
relationship, friend. Those moments have been very, very tough, very hard. Um, but I've never regretted any of those times. But those are the most difficult ones.
What are those maybe 2 to 3 sort of non-negotiables, those tenets you live by that have in most times led to success for you? You know, discipline, integrity. What do you preach to your daughters?
Well, it's the basics, right? Honesty, states. Just be honest, and then perseverance, grit. I think that is the most valuable thing for anyone. Is like you have to stick at it. I mean, what if you have something that you want to achieve? Don't put a time limit on it because that you can, but you just have to stay with it, stay the course. Um, so honesty, and then be kind. Just be kind to people.
That I think those are invaluable. Were there ever times during your film, your acting career, where things just weren't happening rapid enough, and you're questioning?
The thing is, if you have something, I mean, like what I do, I'm an actor. I love diving into personality, exploring the human psyche, and all these things. I'm not in it because I want to be the most famous guy in the world. Because if that was the goal, I would have been, I would have. That's that. How can that be a goal? It doesn't interest me. Um, but sometimes, when you're younger, things are not, when you start your career, you're not getting the offers you want. But I've never had doubt that I would find my way because I believed it in my heart, and so I guess to be honest, the one thing I got from my dad, because even when he messed up his life, but there was one thing he always preached, and that was like you have to work hard, um, and show up, and it's very it's like when you work out. It's like if that thing about you want to get in shape. Yeah, it's not that hard. It's not that complicated. Just show up. Go to the gym, or if you want to lose weight, you just eat less. It's, I know it sounds like, and I don't mean, listen. I know there are a lot of people with medical issues. I'm not trying to point a finger at anyone, but sometimes we overcomplicate things that really aren't.
I think in the latter part of my military career, I had very little doubt. But now that I've gotten out and I've retired, and in a lot of sense, similar to Tyler Gray's story, we're redefining ourselves. I've had a lot more doubt since I'm 40 and I'm only 44 now, but um, of hey, even this for Men's Journal, do I suck at interviewing people? Because this was not a skill I've had, and having to learn this as quickly as possible has been it's been a shot to the ego a little bit.
But that is good. That is, I think that is really good. Because doubt. God knows, I've also had doubt, but I've never doubted that I was on the right trajectory and I was on the right course and all that. But I doubt myself all the time, and I think I think it's important to acknowledge, and then to be able to kind of to force yourself to open up your mind to new things. And as I said earlier, I definitely have had uh, issues of wanting to be able to control everything, and that is not good, because then you miss out on good things. Uh, but doubt, yeah, and I guess, and I definitely recognize that thing you say, getting older. Yeah, but also once you know more, you realize there's more to be learned. If that makes sense.
It makes
You
perfect
know what I
sense.
mean? Like, the more you know, the more there is to know. I mean, and I always find it. There's nothing. What is so strange? Like, most people I know and everyone I meet, when you meet and talk, we when you connect with someone, you also realize that shit, there's so many ways to look at a situation, and there's not a right or wrong way. We just come at it from different angles and this different perspective, and that's really interesting. And we should treasure that. And then suddenly you turn on the news, you read, you get the impression that oh, no, no, people are in two tribes, and this is like, and it's just not real. It's not a real. That is not how, how we live as human beings. It's just not real, and it just blows my mind why we allow the narrative of division to rule our world. It's a completely different story, but it does drive me crazy.
Before we end, I do want to talk about your passion project, and I'm actually excited about this one, Radio Man. Let's hear this. Why you got involved with this? Why you're excited?
Well, I've been working with my closest friend Joe Derrick for years. He's a writer. We write together. We did a movie that you should check out called Against the Ice on Netflix, which we shot in Iceland and Greenland, which is about this explorer. Amazing. Really proud of that movie. And then we heard about this real story about a killer in a small town in Eastern Europe, and we then got the core of that story. That was inspiring. because it was basically about a guy who created his own, like a journalist who created his own crime story. And we put that into the north of England, and we created this podcast that is on Audible called Radio Man. And Joe wrote it. I star in it with a guy with David Morrissey. You might have seen him in Walking Dead. And it's just it's a and then we were very lucky because I didn't know podcasts actually before uh, COVID. I wasn't really listening to podcasts, and suddenly I found myself having a lot of time, and I was starting to listen to podcasts, and it just now when I work out or in my car, I always have something on because it's just a great way to hear stories. And one of the stories I heard was a thing called the Greenfell Tower, which was created by this guy. The sound was created by this guy called Ben Brick, and we got hold of him for our show. And what he does is he creates this audio world, which is like a mix of a movie and a book. It's so vivid. Um, and yeah, I can talk about this a long time. But Radio Man, it's on Audible. I am insanely proud of it. And if you're listening for a true crime podcast, that's the one.
Last question. How is Nikolaj going to evaluate whether he's lived a life of impact? What is most important to you, man? The legacy you're going to leave behind.
Oh, I mean, I think that the legacy, I don't know. I mean, I think that's, as you know, your kids will live on, and hopefully they'll have some kids. And I think I'm looking forward to that. I think for me, the big issues, if you talk about apart from the career and all that, and my family, then I've spent a lot of time working with the United Nations Development Program, and there are some, we're starting production on a documentary which is called Earthrise, which is about these challenges we all face globally, which is like obviously the biggest one is the climate change, which is real, which is happening, which is going to affect all of us. And it's what I want to do is to tell the story of hope, tell a story of that is solution based, because there are actually incredibly smart people out there that have come up with solutions to some of these issues, and also that we can scale. So we're going to tell the story about that. And I think that's not my legacy, but that's what I hope will be our legacy, all of us, that we were able to course correct. That's what I really hope, that when you and I sit back in 30 years time and we are old men, that we won't be looking at a world that is falling apart, but we'll be going, thank God we stepped up. We we as a species weren't as stupid as we thought we were for a second.
Well, if we don't leave the place better than we found it, then we failed across the board. So I could not agree more. Hey, Nikolaj Coster-Waldau, thank you for joining me. I've learned from this. I wish you and your family nothing but blessings, and hopefully one day I can shake your hand in person.
I hope, Mike. I hope we can meet. I would love to continue this conversation. It's been a real pleasure.